And we've talked about this on my channel before, but for the audience that doesn't know, a peculiar thing about being injected IV methamphetamine is very different than snorting it or anything else, is that you may spontaneously ejaculate. This happens very frequently. Some people on my video that said that, they commented, they're like, I'm an IV meth user, I don't ejaculate. And then people respond to them, you're like, yes, I do, yes, I do, yes. There's tons of people that do. So it's a very, I'm saying this for is, it's a very powerful hedonistic pleasure. To imagine how that influenced the world leader injecting IV methamphetamine is very interesting. But he was also injecting. Do you have that article about the guys using Adderall in college? Eric sent it to us?
Yeah, it's it was a
maybe you can share it.
It was a screenshot that maybe I can pull up here, because I don't know if it was an actual article as much as it was like a survey / observational thing. But let me try and pull it up. But basically, if you guys don't follow Andrew Huberman, he's a well-respected neuroscientist from Stanford, and he actually shared this recently. I will put it in the WhatsApp chat, and then maybe we can edit it onto the screen or something, or we can just read it out, because ultimately it is just a tweet anyways. But
you want me to share?
Oh yeah, I guess you can screen. I don't know if you want to screen share your WhatsApp, but after
you
you
download the picture and screen share.
Yeah, let me download.
You know what's interesting is I was looking recently actually for frequencies of Adderall use among college students, but I wasn't finding some very informative papers, and I think that they were not really accurate.
Yeah. So this is like, did you guys get the picture?
Yeah, I'm sharing now.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay, so I just learned from a colleague, and it was confirmed by every student I asked, that 25% of students age 16 to 32 take Adderall 1 to 7 times per week, not prescribed. 5 to 10% do the same with modafinil or armodafinil. 30 to 35% of students are on amphetamine. This is serious. Safer options exist. So this could lead to a lot of different discussions. This I'm glad we're skipping to this, by the way, because
why did he say 30 to 35%? Oh, that use it at all in general?
Yeah, I guess so. Now, obviously, this is like not some.
He's not adding the modafinil percent to the Adderall percent and saying amphetamine, right?
I hope not, but I'm 100%. I would doubt he would do that. So, because he talks about the difference between these drugs, pharmacology, and everything. So, I don't think so. But
so this is a very interesting point of discussion. I thought that it could lead us into the idea of, well, first of all, I wanted to mention, just for people that don't know, this is not new at all. People that don't know much about the history of these drugs tend to get surprised. They're like, oh, the students are on Adderall. Well, in the 1930s, in Nazi Germany, all the med students were on methamphetamine. They were doing it back then. The drug was called Pervitin. And I came across it recently, a story about it in a book called Blitzed. I forgot the author's name, but it's a great book on drug use in Nazi Germany and in World War II. You'll find that these drugs were abused by students forever, since they were ever discovered, actually. First of all. The second thing I wanted to discuss is I thought that it would be cool to discuss what some famous world leaders were taking, because we're talking about Adderall and stimulants. And the interesting thing is, I believe that a lot of the world leaders currently leading nations are on stimulants. I also think so about a lot of CEOs, but we don't have much proof of it in contemporary times. But I thought it could be interesting to reflect on what we do know about, even though it is 70 years ago. So, for example, Hitler is a very interesting case. So I took some notes here just so I don't miss anything.
I'm going to share my screen. I got some overlays to entertain.
First of all, Hitler and JFK, actually. Well, this is just Hitler and JFK were just to run, because he looks like he's on meth. That's the interesting thing. But a lot of these speeches, see, this is 1935. This is before he met Dr. Morell. Dr. Morell was sort of the Dan Duchaine of World War II Germany. Morell would give injections that were not completely clear to a variety of let's pause this, Steve, to a variety of high placed individuals in the Third Reich in Germany, and Hitler heard of him eventually and began to take his injections. Now, he was famous for giving vitamin and animal extract injections, things like you would imagine cerebral lysin, but they didn't have that then. But those
It's
kind
like-
of extracts and then vitamins. But interestingly, he took a lot of detailed notes of his injections to Hitler, and he was injecting him by the time the World War started, 1942 or so, at least daily, at least every other day, often daily, many times, multiple times a day, and he was injecting him with Pervitin, methamphetamine, injection IV, just to be clear. And we've talked about this on my channel before, but for the audience that doesn't know, a peculiar thing about being injected IV methamphetamine is very different than snorting it or anything else, is that you may spontaneously ejaculate. This happens very frequently. Some people on my video that said that, they commented, they're like, I'm an IV meth user, I don't ejaculate. And then people respond to them, you're like, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, there's tons of people that do. So it's a very, all I'm saying this for is it's a very powerful hedonistic pleasure. To imagine how that influenced the world leader injecting IV methamphetamine is very interesting. But he was also injecting cocaine IV routinely, to the point where Dr. Morell, he complained to Dr. Morell one day that he said, I'm not becoming addicted to the cocaine, am I? Because they were doing it daily in the morning. And the Morell said, no, cocaine addicts snort it. We are using a nasal cream. So he was injecting it and using a nasal cream. And he was using Eucodol, which is actually oxycodone. They were injecting oxycodone when he would feel tired.
His
So if
dick must have been non-functional.
I don't. Not only that. Speaking of which,
That's why he took the amphetamines, right? To at least get some of the pleasure out of it.
Speaking of which, Derek, he started to develop what's called Parkinsonian symptoms later in his. I don't know if you ever heard of this. Like the last 2 years, especially the Western nations were noticing that his movements started to get very jerky, and sometimes when he was holding his hands behind his back, his hand would start have a tremor in it. So people believe that he may be developing Parkinson's disease. Now, if that is the case, it's potentially the case that the IV methamphetamine injections could have been going on longer than we know and could have caused slow dopaminergic neuron loss in the body, causing Parkinson's disease. Or it could be the case that he was going through withdrawal from the opiates during the daytime and didn't even realize, so he was taking a lot of things. So that's the first gentleman. The second one I wanted to talk about was JFK.
Before we get into JFK, which some of these are huge, very, very interesting. The difference in pharmacology between amphetamine and methamphetamine, like obviously on paper, they sound structurally like you would think as an anabolics guy, like, oh, it's just like a methylated version of amphetamine. Like, what is the difference in pharmacology and like how different really is it? Because like you have a lot of kids being prescribed amphetamines now, and like what is the difference between the two?
So to tell you the truth, so you would think, just for those that don't know, methylating a molecule is a chemical change that's done to a molecule. It doesn't usually predict how the molecule acts exactly. So a methylated version of a molecule doesn't just mean it's a super strong version, but it may have particular effects. So methamphetamine is more dopaminergic, more intensely dopaminergic, and I believe serotonergic, but far more dopaminergic than amphetamine is. And amphetamine, for example, is far more dopaminergic than Ritalin is.
You can compare methylated boldenone being the anabol to methylated masterone being superdrol. I mean, it's completely different pharmacodynamics from the parent hormone. So,
if you look at studies on how amphetamines cause brain damage, they usually look at methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is by far the most likely to cause what's called dopamine neurotoxicity. It's so sudden and overwhelming and but let me tell you the truth. If you take a guy who's used amphetamine like 2 or 3 times and you give him 10 milligrams of methamphetamine, I've tried this, and 10 milligrams of amphetamine, you'd be hard pressed to to know the difference. It's not that easy to notice, especially if you take it orally.
yeah.
The difference is that a lot of these meth addicts, it's not just the drug that's different, it's that the way they consume it. So they smoke it or IV it, and that's why I was mentioning earlier these weird results that come when you IV or smoke it. You know, these sudden dopaminergic effects.
Yeah, and with snorting, the dosing is even more difficult, right? Because you don't know how much permeates and the potency of the
feeling of the drug is completely different if it's snorted. I've never smoked or injected, but I've snorted just to experiment once, and it's very different. The feeling, very powerful, and even sublingual effects are very different. So moving on to JFK,